Today, I'm joined by Vinny Martin, good friend of mine. Vinny is a real estate agent. He's an investor. He's also an officer in the National Guard. He just got back from a over 9-month deployment overseas. Excited to have you on today, man.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm Jake Garay from the Garay-Michaud Team with Berkshire Hathaway, and you're listening to my podcast, Selling the Suburbs. I'm sitting down with real estate agents, investors, experts, and various professionals throughout the industry. On Selling the Suburbs, we're discussing the truth about real estate, entrepreneurship, and the ever-changing housing market. For everybody who does not know you, I kind of want to hear your story. Obviously, you're involved in a lot of different things. You've got a really interesting and unique story that I want to kind of allow you the opportunity to share today. So how'd you kind of get started in real estate? Take us back to, how'd you get here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I went to Utica College. I did ROTC up there 4 years and commissioned through Syracuse University and got started with that. I knew I was going to go into the National Guard. Part of that was I got a certain scholarship that the National Guard was giving out back in 2014. They're still giving it out. But I took that. I had a contract with them it's essentially 8 years after you graduate. So I still got another year left on that contract. So that kind of got me into the whole officer thing in the National Guard. And essentially I've been active duty for the past going on almost 5 years now with the National Guard. And then again, just coming back from the deployment, that was about 10 months away from home altogether. So,
This is after you ran the COVID vaccination center at the Javits Center
This was, post-COVID Javits Center. I was on another federal mission that was stateside for 3 years that my unit had that mission. So that's kind of the backstory on the National Guard stuff. But in regards to just real estate in general, once I graduated college, while I was in college, I was taking some of the civil service exams, and I was interested in maybe pursuing law enforcement. I actually got hired by Ulster County Corrections. That was right after college, and I think I was working with your father at the time for like a couple months that summer, and they called me. I went in, I started that whole process. I was working there probably for maybe about a month or so, and I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. I remember it was kind of a tough decision because obviously there's some good benefits to that job, and it's something that, my father was always in law enforcement, my sisters are in law enforcement, so it was something that was close to home and something that I knew. But I'll tell you what, going in, day to day, it wasn't something that I was interested in pursuing. So I kind of made that decision a couple weeks in. I was like, yeah, it's really not for me. And I think I went right back to working with your father. And that was for at least that year until I left to go to officer school, to Bullock, which was down in Virginia. So I had basically a year at a time that I was working with your dad, where I was kind of seeing what he was doing. I saw he was into the rental properties. He had a couple of his own. Obviously, working construction, you start to really get familiarized with the process of everything. So it kind of gave me confidence to start to get into, some small multifamily investment properties, which is, what we were doing. And that was that. And I mean, so after post working for your dad, I went to officer school it was 4 months, came back, I met someone who was working for Amazon, and I got linked up with that. So I basically opened me the opportunity for a steady job, something where I could show some income. And that's, I think, immediately, basically, we started looking for a small multifamily property at that point. That's something that I always wanted to do after working for your father, seeing kind of how he was doing things, and, just digging into some of the books that we've read is like, I want to buy a multifamily property before I buy a single family home. So that was like first on my list was, hey, let's find something that will help, one, pay my mortgage, and maybe I can make a couple bucks on it. So coming back, I think we started looking right in Poughkeepsie at that time.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like before that, because I was working in Jersey for Amazon, I started to analyze some of the deals there around like where I was working, and the numbers, they didn't correlate to what you were getting in Poughkeepsie at the time for one, just really cash flow. When we were looking at the cash flow, that was a big thing. And the Jersey properties, they just weren't doing it. So that kind of got me into the small multifamily investments. And one led to another, and here we are. So
what was it? Kind of take us through the first deal, because I think you started how a lot of different investors start out, right? Which is you go out, you find a property that you can buy with an FHA, or in your situation, a VA loan because of the military ties. And you bought that as like an owner occupant, right? So you live in one unit, you rent out whatever other units you have, and you try and, like you said, offset your costs. And maybe if if you buy a really good deal, maybe you do cash flow. What was it that made you decide that that was the way that you wanted to go, instead of going kind of like your traditional 25% down?
So one thing, obviously, with the VA loan is, I mean, many people know this, but there's 0% down. So that's a big win, especially when you're first starting out and you don't have a lot of cash. I think I ended up using my bonus check from Amazon to help put some of the money down that I needed. And I mean, really what it does is it gives you the leverage that a lot of people don't have, having just being in the military and qualifying for that loan. It's less money out of pocket. So you could take that, say that extra, I don't know, we'll pick a number, say it's $20,000 that you have to put down additionally. You can now take that money and now put it into the property to help you get started. Because, I mean, especially at that time, we were looking at older properties. I mean, these houses are, anywhere between 80 to 100 years old, I would say, at least, especially with that first one. And the place is going to need some work. It's going to need a boiler. I think the boiler I had to replace in that first year. And it's just some other things, some tree work that I had to do, some cosmetic stuff because it was really left unkept inside. So all those little things that you really need to do to get started to attract the right tenants, that money now puts you in an advantage point to do those things. So that's why, the VA loan was really, something that we were able to leverage at that time, to make it work.
And I remember back when you were looking, it's a completely different market, right? Because this is what, 2018, I want to say? Yeah.
2017 into 18.
So I remember distinctly, we went out probably 2 or 3 times. We looked at maybe 3 to 5 houses every single time, if that, sometimes less. And I remember we sat down together and we analyzed the numbers on every single one of the deals, right?
Yep.
And what we did was we sat down, we wrote, okay, this property, we would pay this price to get this return. And we did that on all 4 or 5. And then we made offers on all of them.
Yep.
Right? Different market, more inventory, more options. And we basically said, we're just going to go after the deal that makes the best sense, right? Like whichever one negotiates the most and whichever one gives us the best deal, is the one you're going to buy.
Yep.
Which is completely different than now, which is, to find 5 properties you'd even make an offer on, some people have to wait 6, 7, 8 months right now.
Yeah,
you know, interest rates
absolutely.
were less, and it's just crazy to see in just 5 years the difference that the process of buying a home could go through. So now you've kind of experienced that, right? Because you now own what, 4 total properties?
Yep.
So you have 4 properties and how many doors?
10 doors.
So that's pretty awesome. You know, from 0% down on the first one to, you know, 5 years later, 4 houses, 10 doors, and you know, you've obviously owner occupied, so you've lived essentially for free for the last 5 years, rent free.
Yep.
And so I guess, you know, my question is, how did you evaluate, what was it that your goal was for that first one? Because I think a lot of buyers and a lot of investors, they look at the cash flow, they look at the different, they read a book, right? Or they listen to a podcast, or they watch a YouTube video, and they hear that these kind of like home run deals, right? That these people will talk about. Oh, I bought this property and it makes me, you know, $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month. And I only had to come out of pocket, you know, 30, 40, 50 grand. And these crazy numbers that it's like once in a lifetime deals. And I think that sets an unrealistic precedent for what they're looking for. So for you, when you were going out and looking at that first property, like what was the goal? Was it, I want to make X amount of money? Was it, I just want to break even? Do I just want to get my foot in the door and kind of get in the game? Like what was the ultimate goal when you were looking at, you know, your first investment?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I was just trying to get started. I knew that's what I wanted to get into. But actually this is something that your dad told me when I was working for him, is when he had said, when you're looking at properties, he's like, just try to offset it with 1 or 2 of the bills that you have. So like if your cars, say the car costs you $300-400 a month, your car insurance is $200 a month, say whatever, $650, $700, right? If the property could cash flow $800, your car's now paid for, you know? So it's little stuff like that. Now, if you do that for each one of your bills, now you're living for free, you know? So you take, it's a very simple, easy way to look at it. And it, again, hey, you know, covering your car payment, it might not change your whole life around, but you start there, and now I'm taking care of my grocery bills every month. Now I'm taking care of my gas bill, everything essentially paid for. And that's really what real estate does for you, is take care of those bills to the point where now you could be financially independent. And not to say that you know you're living in
You live in the
Hollywood
lifestyles of the
Hills.
rich and the famous.
You're not living in Hollywood Hills, but hey, most of my bills are paid for by my real estate. So that's really what I was after then. And it's just the concept to me. It's a peace of mind to have your properties pay for your bills.
And you have somebody else, you know, it's leverage, right? So you've got somebody else paying those bills. They're paying down the mortgage, they're paying your taxes and everything else. So it's not even like you're contributing to that monthly, it's somebody else. And it's interesting because, you know, 5 years, you always have the benefit of looking backwards, right? And in 5 years, we've had a 2.5, 3-year global pandemic, right? You were stuck down in New York City for God knows how long. So you couldn't do anything then. You had to go overseas for over, you know, when it was all said and done, over 10 months, plus the training for that and everything getting ready.
Yep.
You know, you've lost a year and a half, if not more, of time that you could have dedicated to anything else. And yet here you are, 10 doors in, 4 properties. And if you had said this in 2018, hey, you're going to go through X, Y, and Z, can you buy 10 doors in 5 years, 4 buildings in 5 years? You'd be like, I have no idea how that's going to happen. So,
Right.
you know, they always say people overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in 5 or 10. And that's, you know, in retrospect, you probably feel like, oh, I could have, if I was here, I could have bought more, right? I could have bought more. I could have done more. But in reality, you know, you own all of this real estate now, and it happened almost seamlessly. Obviously, there's a lot of hard work and dedication and time spent on those properties, but, you know, you essentially buy one a year, one every 13, 14, 15 months. And slowly but surely, you build that portfolio and you cover yourself. And obviously, each deal was different. And we can talk about kind of like how you're structuring your deals now, how you're finding them, and like, you know, how you can roll, because it's hard. The thing that happens to so many investors, they buy that first deal and then it's like, well, you know, I'm not going to make 125, 150,000 in cash to go buy the next one. So kind of take me through. You buy the first deal. How do you find the next deal, right? Like, how do you purchase that next deal? And you did something very unique. So I'm curious to hear how you kind of go about this. But, you know, you buy the first property, you get your first two family, and then it's like, okay, you know, however long it was, a year, 15 months later, you say, I want to go and buy the next one. How did you find that next property? How did you finance it? What was kind of like the next step for you after you bought that first one?
Yeah, definitely. So it was probably about a year in between them. And I ended up buying a single family home in the same exact town, 2 streets over. And I was able to leverage a 5% down single family loan. So going from a 2-family to a 1-family, that story obviously to the bank is that, hey, I want to purchase a bigger home. So I was able to, it actually ended up being my grandfather's home that he owned back in like the 80s. And
sold. He didn't own it anymore.
And he sold it. Yeah, he sold it over to the neighbors. And we were looking, and come to find out, it was this house. So we ended up, again, 5% down. So a live-in loan to leverage that low money down. Moved in, pretty much renovated the whole place, you know, soup to nuts, the whole thing. And now I'm in that property about a year, renovated it, lived in it, rented it out, and now I think a year, fast forward a year again, we're looking at a third property, which is the 3-family home, which was, again, same town, just down the street, basically, where we, that was probably the toughest deal.
So this was interesting because you found a loophole in financing that not a lot of people are aware of. So with FHA and VA loans, they get compared oftentimes because they kind of get thrown in together as, oh, they're the same thing. The VA is just like an FHA version for, you know, military veterans, right? And you found the loophole where everybody assumed you could only have one VA loan at a time. And what did you do? You
Yeah, so and this is really for anybody who's using the VA loan, is that it's important to know what your actual your funding is and your eligibility. So you'll get your certificate of eligibility from the VA, and that'll give you your price point per county depending on where you're purchasing. And it differentiates itself depending on how many units you're buying. So if you're buying a 4-family home, you're going to have more eligibility than you're going to have, say, for a single-family home. So what I might get for a 4-family home in Dutchess might be just under $1 million, where a single-family home, I'll get maybe $400,000 to $500,000. So it's important to look at that. Because initially when I was working with my lender, they didn't know either that this was something that you can pursue. So once I did my homework with the VA, I was like, actually, I have an additional $500,000 of equity, or excuse me, not equity, eligibility, because we purchased a 2-family home that first time around. So what you're going to get with 6 doors with the VA is going to be a lot more than what they're going to give you, say, with 1 door. So it's important to know that aspect. And a lot of times you are going to be told no. And you're going to have to kind of just get creative and you know, keep knocking on doors or keep calling a lender until they give you what you want.
Someone's willing to look into it.
Yeah, and that's part of it.
So you basically went and read the guidelines and found out that, hey, it's not one loan, it's one total amount.
It's an amount, yeah.
And so when you found that out, nobody knew that. You called around. I remember you calling me and saying, I think I can do this. Now I just need to find someone who can do it. The lender you were working with ended up looking into
Yep.
it and was able to make it happen. So you're like, I tell people that story all the time. I'm like, you know, I have a friend who not has one house, but two houses, both with VA loans, 5 total doors. It's like, it's a remarkable story that not a lot of people realize that power that's out there. So if you are someone that's in the military, you really need to look into that and be educated on this, because if you're just going around asking, you're not going to get the correct information sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it like you said, it comes down to the leverage aspect, because if I didn't have the ability to utilize that loan, I wouldn't have the 5 doors, because it's just your ability to leverage really what you have and take advantage of it. So
to make a long story short, you know, you buy that first, second, and third property. You eventually acquire a fourth. Then obviously COVID, pandemic, you're in the city, you're dealing with that. Then you go overseas. For someone who looks at real estate and is like, that sounds great. I love the leverage. I love the opportunity. I love the idea of having a tenant pay my rent. But what scares me is the management, right? How did you manage your properties running a vaccination center during a global pandemic, or going overseas to the Middle East and not being here? What were the systems that you put in place? How did you do that so that you could still run those properties and not have to worry and stress about it too much?
So first off, my family is awesome. My wife Lisa, my parents, they held it down. But just on top of that, so first is just having the right people in place. I'm fortunate to have that. However, what I did do before I left was I basically put together almost just like a contact list or a simple spreadsheet as to whatever issue there's a person to call, right? So plumbing, you know, a solid plumber who I've used in the past, solid electric person, typical, you know, handy person who you can call for little minor stuff. So I think having just like a small little roster of who to call depending on what the issue is. And then some of these automated systems that they have now, one that I use, they talk about on Bigger Pockets a lot, is Rent Ready. So mostly all my tenants, they pay through Rent Ready. So it's a simple way to kind of just have all your rent go to one place. If there's an issue in one of the units, the tenants could actually put it right in on the app and put a what do you call it? Almost like a little bit of like a work order.
Yep.
So to call. So something like that where everything could be managed as far as the rents go and the actual units. And then there's going to be issues, right? Whether it's a simple one or a large one, as long as you have that person to match up with the issue, it's going to go a long way.
So you basically looked at like, what are all the potential things that could go wrong, and then just tried to have plans in place on how to deal with them when you're, you know, thousands of miles away with no cell reception and can't handle anything.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
I do think, and I speak with a lot of different investors, and I think there's a lot of people who want to own real estate, but they hear the horror story, right? They hear the pipe bursting at 2 a.m. And the reality is, I think for most people, that doesn't really happen all too often, if at all. You know, there's very rarely an emergency that needs to be dealt with right away. And we even have investors who will say, oh, do you have a property manager? And can you, you know, recommend someone that can take on this responsibility? And they just want that passive income of collecting a check every single month, not realizing that you're giving away 8, 10, 12% of your income to these people that they don't really do much of anything at all, right? So you kind of figured out how to self-manage while also having a team of people in place that could take care of anything if something comes up. You're not the one going over and fixing the plumbing or the electric. You're not the one going around doing a little bit of handyman work. You've obviously done some of that work before, but you had the systems in place. So I think it's all the planning that you did up front that made it a lot easier, instead of having to worry about like, oh, now there's the problem. How do I figure it out, right?
Yeah.
You figured out the solution before the problem even came up.
Definitely.
Which is genius if you think about it. So obviously, you own the 4 properties, you manage those. What's the kind of criteria as we talk about investing looking forward? Like, what type of properties are you identifying? I know one of the things we can touch on that we haven't yet as well is the Airbnb, right? So I know you now have an Airbnb. Tell us a little bit about that. What was the reason that you wanted to do that? How's that been? Is it management intensive? Has it been successful? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the Airbnb property, we wanted to give it a shot. It's in an area that's what we thought would do pretty well, being in the Hudson Valley, actually being in Poughkeepsie, close to Vassar College. So we wanted to give that a shot. What's good about Airbnb is the cash flow. So typically, this particular unit that we've been renting, typically it would do probably like $1,500 to $1,600 on, as a long-term rental. With the short-term rental, we're bringing in a little over $2,000. So it's a little bit more cash flow. And again, we're really in the new stages of it. It's only been on for a couple months now. So we're still kind of building it up. But it's something that we've always thought about doing. And it just felt like the right time to get into it and give it a shot. Again, the location's pretty good for it. It is very hands-on. I'm fortunate to have my wife pretty much take care of it. So she's on top of like the cleaning. She does most of the cleaning. So she's on top of that. Again, my parents will come up and help out with that as well. But it is one thing to think about before you get into the Airbnb. It is a lot more hands-on than the long-term rentals. And if you are going to hire out somebody to clean it and manage it, you're obviously there's a cost to that too. So it's just something to bear in mind. But and as far as just looking forward, I mean, the market it has changed obviously with the rates and the inventory being what it is. I'm at the point now where I can't necessarily tap into that low money down leverage that I did have. So I have been analyzing some deals north of here, closer to actually where I went to school, up towards like the Utica, Syracuse area. There's some deals that I've been analyzing up there that, in my opinion, you're gonna put probably about the same amount of cash down as I did to get my houses, using a small loan, just because, or excuse me, a small percentage down. Because of the prices up there, they're obviously a lot cheaper. Now, what comes with that is the rents are going to be cheaper as well. However, the way I have always analyzed the deals and the way I still is the cash flow. So, if I'm going to put $20,000 to $30,000 down and I'm going to cash flow $900 a month, $1,200 a month, to me that makes sense every single day of the week. So it's a simple way to look at deals, that's where we're at right now. So,
well, that's exciting. So, have you done anything, or have you explored the option of, you've got these properties that you purchased, and they've obviously grown pretty substantially in value over the last 4 or 5 years. Have you done anything where you look at cash out refis on your properties to buy something new? Like, where are you looking at the next opportunity? Like, how creative are you getting? Are you going with more of the traditional route? And when you're looking at properties, are you looking at kind of, because, you've got a mix, right? You've got some properties in what I would call more like the Class A areas, and then you've got some more in like the Class B and C. Have you noticed a difference with like the management of those? And moving forward, are you trying to specifically buy just one type of property, or are you kind of looking at everything?
So I'm primarily looking at the like small to mid multifamily size. I do like the long-term rental setup. I just think the passive way that kind of brings in cash flow, I tend to like that a little better than the active, say, Airbnb short-term rentals. So I am pursuing those kinds of properties right now. Really just looking, and probably not as much as I have been in the past, just kind of getting home and getting settled back into things and getting this business back moving. But that's where I'm at.
Yeah, no, that's it's interesting because you hear both sides of it, right? Like some people I talk to, they're all about Airbnb. That's all they want to touch. That's all they want to do. But it's really running a business, right? You've got to generate a brand. You've got to build a brand around that. You've got to have a community guide. You've really got to be detail oriented. Otherwise, you're not going to have the same return rate with your customers, the people who rent from you. Then I talk to people who love the long-term model. But then you hear some people who say, oh, well, I love the short term because I'm not committed to a specific tenant. So even if it is a little bit more labor intensive, and even if I make a little bit more money, that money that I'm making extra is probably some of it eaten by the turnover. If you want to systematize it, you've got to have cleaners, you've got to have handymen, you've got to have a much bigger team that has to be available. Because if you have a guest staying, and the shower stops working at 10 o'clock at night, you've got to get over there right away. Whereas if you have a long-term tenant, some tenants are a little bit more, lenient and not as urgent. They just want it done within the next 24 hours. So it's a very different management model when you look at the long-term versus the short-term. The short-term is more almost like a business where you're really in like the hospitality industry, right? You're really running more of a hotel or a bed and breakfast than you are a landlord. So it's interesting. I always like to talk to both sides and see, and you're in a unique position because you've had experience doing both, to say, hey, I have done this and I've done that, and I really prefer this one. So it's interesting, especially because you're not a full-time investor, right? You're doing a bunch of different things. And that's the one thing I wanted to ask you next was, you decided probably about a year and a half ago now to get your real estate license, become a broker. Kind of take me through that thought process. What was what's the goal? What were you doing? Obviously, you're a full-time agent now. I think you did like 17 deals in your first year part-time, which is incredible for anybody who's an agent, and will understand what exactly that means. But what made you decide to get your license, and kind of, where do you see that going?
Yeah, so actually it was during probably towards the back end of the pandemic. We were at the Javits Center. I was working nights at one point, and after a couple conversations with you, I think you had spoke to me that you were going to be teaming up with Blake, and after a couple conversations, it kind of sparked a exciting idea for me too. And I was like, what? Let me just take the course. I'll buy an online course and just take the course and do it. So I ended up taking the course while I was working nights, and got my license, and linked up with you guys. And to me, the thought was, it's something that interests me more, is just the whole real estate process. And having gone through that process myself a few times, I felt like I could help other people understand and go through that same process, right? So that was probably my first thought about really kind of pursuing the agent, the agent side of things. But the other thing was, after having a couple conversations with you, and I think obviously this was post purchasing College Ave and everything. and you had said, hey, I'm thinking about teaming up with Blake, and I have a lot of ideas for what I want to do in the future, and me and you, I think we've always had a similar taste in business and doing things. So I'm like, yeah, I think this is a great idea. So
from the agent side of things, right? And I kind of alluded to it before. You get your license. You're still working. You're on active duty orders, right? You're an officer in the military. How the hell do you do 17 deals your first year? How much did you work? How did you manage that? How did you build your schedule around that? Because I know a lot of agents who won't do that as a full-time agent in a year. And, they look at that and they say, well, I could never do that. How did you do that? How did you work your schedule around that, being that you had a full-time job?
So a lot of it, I think, really what I would consider like the tactics to being an agent is just answering the phone, texting back and forth, having a couple conversations a day, and setting up some appointments for, primarily I was working with probably at least half of those deals were buyers, maybe even more. People work. And if they want to see a house, they're going to see it after 5 o'clock, or they're going to see it on a weekend. So I could work full time, set up my appointments for when I leave work. And yes, there's some late nights involved in that, and there's a lot of conversations on the phone, probably at different hours that I wouldn't normally be having. But it wasn't something that was such an added stress that, it didn't really seem like it was, that much more work than, say, not doing it.
Right.
In a way. You kind of take those things that are part of the business and probably your main lines of effort, which is all communication efforts and setting up some appointments, and you make it part of your schedule. If I got to go and set up to go show some houses on a Saturday morning before, my family plans or whatever I'm going to be doing that Saturday afternoon, it's not, you fill it into the schedule as you see fit. So I think it's something that honestly you can pursue while you're working as well, as long as you are taking the initiative to communicate effectively with the people that you are working with. Because I think that's ideally the biggest thing about, being a successful agent.
And I think, as an outsider looking at what you did, I always say, yes, you were part-time, but you didn't put in part-time effort, right? So yeah, you can have a 40-hour-a-week job, but part-time to me, if you're putting in 30, 40 hours a week in your real estate career plus, you're not a part-time agent, right? You're really dedicating yourself and you're putting in full-time hours, whether it's studying the business, meeting with clients, taking the phone call. The first thing you said was, picking up the phone, which sounds simple enough, but as an agent, you have to make yourself available to your clientele when they're available. The second thing you said was most people work jobs and they want to see houses at night. So you knew that going in, that if I answer the phone and I set my schedule when I'm free around my client's schedule, then they'll work with me. And they did, and I think there's a part of the story that gets lost in that. And this was something I wanted to talk to you about as well. I think you have had a lot of different sales training, right? I know you're very much into reading a lot of personal development books and sales books and entrepreneurship and business books. How much of your success, or your effectiveness, I should say, both in the military and in real estate, do you contribute to the amount of studying that you've done over the last 10 or 12 years to improve your skill set and your knowledge base in business and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I would say a good portion of that, I would say that is because of that. The other part of it is just being a personal person, just personalizing what you're what you're doing with your clients. We're talking about it this morning is like, being an agent, your job isn't to really sell people houses, right? You're advising them on criteria and facts and things that they need to know to make a good decision on whether or not they should buy or sell their house. So you're taking those facts and you're taking that information and you're just organizing it and advising people in a way that they need to be advised in. So it gets twisted when you start to, talk sales, and I think people have an idea about it in their head, but in the grand scheme of things, you're essentially you're advising people, and they need to be able to trust you, and they need to be able to know that you have their best intentions in mind. And I think I was able to do that just quite well with just the way that I approach the business in general. I try to take a personal approach, just to the business and just in general.
And so just hearing you talk about this stuff, I think, yes, personality, I think, goes a long way, and being able to build trust. And it's less about sales and more about building trust, right? Because if your clients don't listen to you, I always tell my clients, if you're not going to listen to the advice that I give, and look, at the end of the day, they're the boss, right? It's their home or it's their purchase. But if you're not going to listen to the advice of the person that you're hiring to represent you, then, why are you hiring them, right? And look, you're never going to listen. You should never blindly just say, oh, because I'm hiring you, I'm going to just listen to 100% of what you're saying, right? There's a nuance there to that conversation. But if they're never listening to their advisor, what's the point, right? If every time you call your financial advisor, you do the opposite of what they tell you to do, why are you working together?
Having one, yeah.
So I think that's part of it for sure. And I think you're never selling. But also, I was talking to another investor, and we got on the topic of, when you become a new agent, it's an amplification of what people think of you, right? So if you go to your cousin, your best friend, your whatever, people that you knew from school, and none of them want to work with you, people don't like that, right? Because now it's like, wait a second, why aren't they hiring me to represent them? And it's because maybe they don't think that you know what you're doing. You may be brand new, or even if you've been in the business for a while, they don't see you as that person, that advisor that I want to have handle my multi-million-dollar or six-figure transaction. And people don't like that. So that's why people tend to stay away from sales. They think it's because they're not good at selling, but it's really, they're not looked at as that serious advisor. And I think for you, what's led to a lot of your success as an outsider is that, look at your pedigree, right? You've got, you're a captain in the United States military, right? You've been a leader of different groups for the last 8-10 years. So people clearly look up to you and what you do. And therefore, because of that, people are more willing to listen to what you have to say, right? It's just like if someone who's a PhD comes and talks to you in their field of expertise, you're much more likely to listen to them than if, an 18-year-old kid who read one book comes and tries to convince you of something that he read online. Yep. So knowing that, is there a way that people can seek that type of credibility out, right? Like, is there a way that people can go out and say, well, I don't like the way people view me. How can someone go out and be looked at differently? How can they make themselves a reliable source of information or a credible source that people actually want to listen to and hear their advice? Do you think that's something that just comes naturally, or is it something that someone can go out and intentionally learn and train themselves to be?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the background, honestly, like what you're saying. I mean, you can't necessarily shortcut going through the process of saying working construction for a year, 2 years, going through the process of, your own deals so that you can build up some of the confidence that you have to advise people on certain things that you've gone through. So how much, just sorry to cut you off. Yeah, no, go ahead.
how often when you're working with clients, does your own personal investment expertise in construction, how often are you talking about that?
Almost, like if I'm out with a buyer, almost every time, because you know what, when I go to look at a house with a buyer, I'm going to tell you what I think's wrong with the house before you even, say anything about ordering an inspection, because I'm going to give you
The upfront, what your opinion is.
And people actually really appreciate that. So it's certain things like that where you can kind of go into the basement and you could say, hey, this is what's going on with the electric. This is what's going on with the boiler, X, Y, and Z. People feel a lot more confident in working with you when you have that sort of just upfront approach to say, that compared to, oh yeah, this place looks great, right? And then we're 2 weeks in and the inspector comes out and is like, oh yeah, well, the septic's no good, the roof's got to be replaced, and there's a laundry list of things. Now you're back at square one because you didn't want to do the right thing from the start, right?
And then on top of that, some people just don't have that knowledge base to be able to say, this is what we need to look for, this is what we need to check. So you're adding a lot of value to your clients and saving them a lot of time.
Yeah, you're
right?
saving your both of you guys a lot of time.
Which they appreciate and they respect.
Yeah.
And that, I think, draws more clientele to you.
Yeah.
But there's a unique kind of relationship, I think, just talking to you, between the military and real estate. I know we've talked about it a few different times, that some of the people that you work with either are investors or they're in the real estate industry in some capacity. Why do you think that is? And entrepreneurship in general, right? Because there always seems to be a correlation between a lot of the very successful business owners and success within the military, right? And you see a lot of people who are successful within that structure go on to either start a successful business or they were successful athletes in school. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's a personality thing? Do you think it's a discipline thing? Do you think it's the system that the military creates?
Part of it is, one thing that the military does is it does a good job of, one, just building leaders in general, because, from the time you're a private to, someone goes down, or, just the nature of the military is that you're going to be in front of people and you're going to be telling people what to do, right? So I think, one, that's part of it. Two is the military in general has this like no fail, get it done mentality overall. So when something comes up and it needs to get done, like there's not a debate on, oh, well, maybe we can figure out another way to do this. It's like, no, this is going to get done, and
You just got to figure out how.
It doesn't matter if this takes, you staying up all night, we're going to get it done, right? So it's that sort of mentality that I think some of the people that are in the military then take to the same approach now to their business and the way that they do things. The other thing I think that the military does a good job of is just the planning process, especially like being an officer. That's essentially what you do, is it's all planning based, right? So, and you'll plan the thing 10 or 15 times over, and it might not get executed anywhere near like how you planned, but it's the process of, hey, this is what we have set up. We have a timeline for this. We have a order for this, and it's all laid out in fine black and white print. Now, this is what we need to get done. So it also gives you that navigation tool to say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the plan. It might not work, but we have a plan. Right? So it's that part of it too. Just that process in general. I think that helps a lot as well.
Yeah, because as an outsider, right, I look at going back to kind of when you went overseas and everything that you've gone through, how the first thing you said was, well, the step one for me when I knew I was going over there was I put together, if this goes wrong, this is what you do, right? This is who you call. And you had contingency planning, which if you read any military book is one of the big things that they always talk about. It's not, people always plan for what if things go right, but they never really plan for what if things go wrong, and playing through those different scenarios. So it's no coincidence that was like the first place your mind went. It's like, hey, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. And it's not like, well, you know, we don't have a solution. Like, we're going to have a solution, and yeah, it might not be the most effective plan, but it doesn't matter if it's the most effective, most efficient, as long as it gets done, at least it's getting done.
Absolutely.
Right? So
yeah, and really that is what the military does. Is it literally tells you, it actually calluses your mind to basically something will go wrong, right? So whenever that does go wrong, this is my second line of effort, third line of effort, and you know that's it really does it makes a huge difference when you start to pursue other things.
So, you know, going through your experience, I'll ask you this question for both agents and investors, right? If you're someone listening and you want to be a brand new real estate investor, what would you say are the steps to get started? What would you do? Someone comes to you and says, Vinny, I want to go out and buy a rental home, or I want to go out and buy an Airbnb. What can I do to start that process? What should you do? What is the best advice that you can give that person?
So for one is link up with an agent who knows what they're talking about, knows what they're doing, and has done the process before, right? So you want to get linked up with the right person. So for me at that time, it was you. So your dad had been in the business. You knew basically what to look for, and how to break down the deal. So I was fortunate to have linked up with you from the start. That would be one. Two is listen to some people who've done it before, which for me, it was always Bigger Pockets. I did listen to Bigger Pockets. I still do. It's just everyday people like myself, you, whoever that are making these things happen. So listening to people and their stories on how they did it, there's nothing special about them. It's just, you know, they took the time to go through the process already. So that would be number two. And three would be just pick up a book on it, you know. There's tons of books out there, and again, it's people have done it time and time again. It's just a matter of you listening to how they did it and doing the exact same thing.
And now for someone who wants to be an agent, right? They look and they say, look, my long-term goal is I want to be an investor, I want to build wealth, but in the short term, I need some way to make money. I want to become a real estate agent. You know, what are your top 2 or 3 tips to someone who can go out and do, you know, here's how you can go out and do 17 deals your first year, and kind of like, you know, what's your best advice for them?
Just be a self-starter. Like anybody that I talk to who has done incredibly well in this space has said those exact words. I think Blake has said it a couple of times. I've spoken to some other agents as well who have done incredibly well. They said that exact same thing. And the thing with that too is you don't necessarily need all these fancy tools or lead generation things. There's a lot that you could do with your own network. And it's a matter of just making sure those people even know that you're doing real estate, right? So no one's gonna give you a call or text you if they don't know that you're an agent, right? So those would be the things that I would say are a must.
Awesome. And lastly, how can people find you? Say they listen to this, they're like, I'm in the military, I want to call Vinny, I want to hear his story, I want to learn about how I can go out and buy multifamily property. You know, how can they get a hold of you? Instagram,
yeah, definitely. I'm on Instagram,
email, whatever it
I'm
is.
on Facebook. They could go to the website. VinnyMartin.com, and everything is on there. So
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it. We'll have to do it again soon.
yeah, thanks, brother.
All right.
Appreciate it.